Welcome to the Relaxed Dog Podcast, the podcast where the dogs are the stars of the show. Welcome to episode 82 of the Relaxed Dog Podcast, sponsored by therelaxeddog.com. Thank you very much for finding this show. I am your host, Robert Ober, and I hope that you and your dog are well. My guest this week is Ciaran Walsh, and he's going to be telling us about Marylin, as well as a very important book concept for people with children wanting a puppy. So if you do listen through to the end of the episode, you should get some great information. If you haven't already done so, hit that subscribe button, and that would be greatly appreciated. In some doggy news, we go to the US, and researchers in Missouri have found that during the COVID-19 pandemic, they did a study and they found dog owners were less depressed during the pandemic than non-dog owners. Surprise, surprise. Now we go to the UK, and a young lady who suffers from non-epileptic seizures has a service dog. His name is Flump, and Flump is a 2-year-old Maltese. Now, this lady got pregnant and was going to hospital to give birth. What do you do when you have that condition and have a dog? You take it with you, of course. So Flump went into the hospital. They took him in a couple of times so he knew what was going on and around the theatre. And happy to say that all went well with the birth, and Flump is bonding well with the baby. Just for those people that are interested, yes, service dogs are allowed in hospitals in the UK and in many other countries around the world, as they should be. And here's this week's interview. Welcome to the Relaxed Dog Podcast. I am here with Ciaran Walsh. How are you?
All good, Robert. All good. Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Oh, an absolute pleasure. So, whereabouts in the world are you?
I'm in a little island called Ireland, which is a temperature probably just about a quarter of what you have there, which is about 12 degrees at the moment, or dropping a bit more tonight. But
refreshing.
Yeah. Fresh, certainly. I'm not sure about refreshing.
Who is going to be the subject of our conversation today?
Our conversation will center around a dog that has sadly passed away a few years ago, called Marylin. And Marylin was a St. Bernard that I met in a rescue shelter in Ireland.
Wonderful. I'm going to, as per usual, ask you to take us back in time to just before you met and tell us about the hows and whys that happened.
Right. Well, I would say this is a series of events or chain of events in the last few years that, I suppose, if we go back to January or February of 2015, I could never have imagined. Because at the time I was sort of happy in the financial world, and I knew exactly how the world worked, or so I thought, and absolutely fine. Now, I would say up to that point, all of my family and friends kept sort of telling me that, I have a certain gift when it comes to animals, and I could never understand that, and I thought everybody was like that anyway. So it's like if you say to an opera singer, you have a great voice, they'll probably say, oh, so does everyone. So what's so special here? But anyway, I was out walking on the countryside one day south of Dublin, and I saw this little plaque on the side of an old building, and curiosity got the better of me. And maybe it's sort of typical. Anybody who works in the financial world, well, where's the small print? I want to have a look at that plaque. I'm not really interested in the sort of sketching of the building. I just want to read the small print. And it turned out to be an old British police station. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that looks interesting. And at the same time, I heard this wall of noise, dogs barking, and I sort of wondered, my gosh, there's a busy farmer. So I thought nothing about that for a few days. And then I was in the local post office for the first time. I moved out of Dublin, just south of Dublin at this time. So it was my first visit to the post office, and there was a poster on the wall next to the counter where you get the stamps. And I just noticed the address and, well, that looks like the old police station. And they were looking for volunteers. I think that's a good coincidence. Might as well get to know some of the neighbours. So I rang them up and said, I've just moved around the corner. Do you need any help to walk dogs? And they invited me in. So first time in there, I got lost finding the place again. That's the sat-nav technology. It works on some roads, but not in the Dublin Mountains or the Wicklow Mountains. So finally got there with about 20 minutes before closing time. And the first dog they gave me was a little terrier called Rosie. And they said, now be careful with Rosie. She's afraid of cars. And so they gave me the dog. And I thought, oh, you're afraid of cars? Well, I mean, this is the middle of nowhere. There'll be no problems here. So I brought her out around this sort of 3-kilometre circular route from the rescue shelter down a road, across road and back. And I thought, this is as boring as it could be. Enough of this. Enough of this. So I had Rosie on the lead, and about 200 metres away from the shelter. And I hear a car coming, and Rosie goes ballistic. So the first thing she does is go straight for the ditch. And there was about 100-foot drop behind the ditch. Ooh. This is mountainous country. So I could see Rosie trying to claw her way back as far as she could from the noise of the car. And then when I was trying to hold her, I could see the lead sort of slipping over her head. And I thought, oh, I have a problem here. So I tried to get down to her without pulling the lead off her, or without pulling the collar off her head. And as my hands went through the briar bush, I could feel the thorns and everything ripping my arms apart, trying to pull this dog back to safety. So this was a strange sort of introduction to the thorns that were to come. So retrieved Rosie, and she was sort of, what's the word I would say? Somewhere between anxious and ballistic. I'm not sure what the word is between anxious and ballistic, but let's say difficult. And yes. So managed to get her back, and I sort of pulled the sleeves back, or what was left of my sleeves, and the blood and everything, and brought her back and said, well, yeah, that was adventurous. And they said, would you like to walk another dog? Because we've one dog that wasn't walked in the last few days. So I said, well, as long as it's not small and something I can manage, there'll be no problem. So they said, oh, yeah, we have just what you're looking for, but this dog will be a little bit difficult to handle. It's very strong. So I said, oh, yeah, no problem. What's the breed? And they said, oh, yeah, you'll see it now. So they brought out a Rottweiler. And the Rottweiler was pulling the member of staff from one side of the yard to the other. And I looked at the manager, and he looked at me, and I said, it's okay, no problem. So this Rottweiler called Toby stopped at my feet, and I just put my hands on him, and he calmed down, sat down, and I said, hello, Toby. And then we just walked. Now, this tends to happen when I'm with animals, usually dogs and horses, that they just go quiet.
Nice.
Right. Now, I have discovered why it happens, which is nice, but we walked out, and then when I came back, the manager asked if I was a dog trainer. And I certainly knew there and then, I see where all this is going. I couldn't understand it, but so to cut the long story short, within a couple of weeks, the manager made some phone calls, and I was studying in a professional school for dog trainers, just part-time. So a couple of evenings of the week and weekends. And within about 2.5 years, I qualified as a professional dog trainer. So part of that route was the star of your show tonight, which was the St. Bernard called Marylin turned up in the rescue shelter about a month or 2 months later. And Marylin had a very dark history. She was about 4 years old at this stage. And I have been told she was in a couple of other shelters that couldn't handle her. And this shelter had a no-kill policy. So her difficulty was if it moved, she would attack it.
Oh, just a small problem.
Small problem. And she was basically, if you like, psychologically damaged. So first day I met Marylin, we seemed to get on absolutely perfect within seconds. And as often is the case, I would say one of the things I'm very guilty of is I can't actually see the viciousness in a lot of dogs until usually it's a bit late in the day. But so first day I just got into the cage with Marylin and absolutely no problem. And we sort of had this, I would say, a natural connection. So one of the things I noticed with Marylin is all of her hair was very badly matted. Now, if anybody has worked with the St. Bernard, it's a very tough job because if you groom them and cut them, it's hard to explain it. It's like one carpet coming off them after the next. There's no end of hair. So I spent, I suppose, the first few weeks trying to get the brush and the scissors, and the manager says, that's probably a suicide mission if you touch her at all. And strange enough, that was never an issue. It was just like, just let's go for it, and we do as much as we can. And it's very tough work to groom a St. Bernard. It just takes hour after hour after hour, and it's hard to explain where all the hair is, but I suppose it's their nature, that they have compact hair, and it's basically what protects them from freezing conditions. Mm-hmm. However, if you're trying to groom them, you'll discover why this is so useful in nature, or how nature works. So now, one of this is the strange part, and if you like, the surreal moment, or one of the many surreal moments in the story with Marylin, which was I could groom her for, say, 20 minutes and she'd get a bit tired, and then she'd let me know she's fed up. So as many of your guests would say, dogs have a way of communicating. They'll grunt or they'll bark or they'll make a certain movement. And if you don't understand it, they'll make exactly the same movement again. So we had an incredibly simple telepathic connection. So whenever Marylin wanted, it was like I could feel it in my stomach, and then suddenly it's in my head. So she was happy enough with, say, 10, 15 minutes grooming and cutting in the cage, and that was it. And then we'd go out, and there was a particular place on the route where she was happy to stop and stay for another 20 or 30 minutes. And again, I'd bring the scissors and the grooming brush and chop. And what's important is, like, some of her hair was so matted that nobody had groomed it or cut it in the years before, because I think they took the manager's advice. That would have been a suicide mission. That I was probably the first person she never attacked. So we got this spot, which is sort of which on the road around this circular route, but it was a little bit in off the road, trees and everything. So even if it rained, there's no problem. And she'd stay still, and I'd cut away and chop, chop, chop. So as the weeks went on, and this is sort of normal in the Irish countryside, the foxes do their business, and sometimes wild cats do their business, and they take a chicken here and a chicken there. And there's this rumor going around that there must have been a very dangerous wild cat, because the remains of the chickens, in other words, the hair and whatever, was turning up in this place. And I thought this was quite interesting. So there was a lot of the locals were sort of looking at the remains of Marylin's fleece and adding 1 to 1 and getting 20, saying, there's a very dangerous animal in the vicinity.
Yes, mystery animal.
Mystery animal. So that was one of the odd memories. But the other thing with Marylin is that whenever I was walking her, I had to sort of wear a special belt with a second a second lead, and then she had the normal harnesses that have the ring on the front to disable the dog from attacking or charging.
Mm-hmm.
So what I suppose if anybody's unfamiliar with that, the leash or the harness is the normal sort of body harness that most dogs would have, instead of just the lead coming from the collar. But with this, you would have the lead attached to the back of the harness and to the front. And the idea is that if you pull on the front, the dog's legs are squeezed together.
Squeezed together, yeah. So it hobbles in from charging and redirects the force.
Then Exactly. So a safety measure. And then I had to wear a belt and a second lead to make sure if anything went wrong, we had as much control as possible. And the reason for that is if there was another dog or a walker or a hiker coming in the opposite direction, I quite simply had to find a way to keep a distance or take Marylin off the road. And quite simply, if there was any mishap, the danger was way too high. And I would say beyond that, this is the problem with no-kill shelters. You get a lot of dogs and they will spend most of their life in a cage.
Sadly.
So, yeah, unfortunately. So I looked after, with Marylin, there was 11 other dogs, which were aptly called the usual suspects. So, and they all had the same route, psychologically damaged and quite dangerous. And because the shelter had a no-kill policy, they were kept alive. But it was very hard to find anybody experienced enough to handle a dog, take the risk of bringing them out, and the risk was very high. So that was the first adventure with Marylin. And then when I was studying to be a professional dog trainer, I had to sort of do a lot of exercises with her. So she was, and these were recorded, and you'd submit the video. And she was just the perfect candidate to do exercise after exercise. That for some reason, any time I took her out, we just had this natural flow.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And so as the years went by, I would say her behavior with me was almost perfect, but we could never get over getting that to any higher level, which was one of the regrets I'll always have. That, and I suppose this is where, when the question was what my dog ate I would say my financial career, because during this time when I looked at the rescue shelter and I looked at the whole, we'll say, domestic dog situation, and then how many dogs there are in the world, and how does this work everywhere? What is the role of the dog in the world, in our houses? And, the strange thing is when you look at it globally, you see that there are 900 million dogs on planet Earth. 700 million live in houses, 200 million live on the street dogs. And in some countries, it's like 100% are domestic dogs. That would be your typical Switzerland. Most European countries. Go to Asia, South America, it can be 30% live in houses, 70% live on the street. So what's sort of odd is dogs are very often a reflection of the economy, the political situation, right down to the microscope. And the thing that Marylin sort of taught me was, how can this be changed? Or how can her situation be changed? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, as I said, Marylin died way too early. She died about 3 years after I met her. But it was a case of when you have as a dog or a human or anybody who isn't living according to the way they were designed by nature, well then time runs against them. In other words, their lifespan is going to be impacted. So if you like, nature will allow anything to live to its full potential. But it will also be, if you like, time. There's a famous quote from Gorbachev many years ago. He says, time punishes those who come too late. And I think in the same way, nature will punish anybody and everything that doesn't live according to its rules or according to its design. So when I looked at, how dogs live in rescue shelters, here you have natural creations going back thousands of years. And in Marylin's case, she would have been happy, would say, running around the mountains 25 miles, 50 miles a day without even thinking about it. And yet, almost every day she was confined to a tiny cage. So, well, nature was going to say, well, what's the point of this? So let's close the shop early. So, when you have animals like that and the diet isn't within, rescue shelters and volunteers, they do what they can within the system.
Yeah, what they can with what they can get.
With what they can get. And so basically, I remember the last day with Marilyn, we were out walking. I think before I get to the last day, I canvassed nearly every dog handler who worked with St. Bernard's in Ireland and the UK to see if there was any possibility of her getting out of the shelter. And unfortunately, that didn't happen.
Oh. So did her reactivity, I know it's hard to to quantify, but if you were to give a percentage type thing from before when you just met her and after spending a couple of years with her, what sort of reduction in reactivity do you think she had, or with other dogs and animals?
Okay, that's a very good question. In terms of, I'll split that into two parts. I would say with myself and perhaps the manager of the shelter and one or two other volunteers, our relationships improved enormously. That at the beginning, everybody was afraid to even put food into her cage. Mm-hmm. And within that time span when I worked with her, there was no issues with the people she knew. To put this into a context, there was one moment when I noticed one of her nails seemed to look as if it was ingrowing, and I got the veterinary nurse who visited the shelter and she said, yeah, we have to start clipping her nails and do a sort of a minor operation. Well, not a surgical operation, but something you do with a clippers, no problem. And there was a 20-minute discussion with the manager on how dangerous this was and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. And Marilyn had a history. If she was slightly upset, she would go for somebody. And with a dog this size, if you were bitten, the damage could be severe and it could be irreparable. So basically, I felt, now looking back on it, I thought I was actually foolish at the time. And I thought, no, we'll be able to handle this. There'll be no problem. And sure enough, I fed her continuously while she was lying, when I had her on the ground, and the veterinary nurse was just clipping away, and there was no issue. So we'll say 2 years before I got involved with Marilyn, that certainly would have been way too dangerous to even think about. Mm-hmm. Now, against that, so to get over the bridge of could she have left the shelter? The answer is unfortunately no. You would have to have, we discussed this quite a bit, and the reactivity to anybody moving never abated. Unfortunately, we tried a lot of things, but that's just the nature of it. Sometimes the very negative psychological impacts that people get, or even animals, if it's so hardwired, they just cannot get
Absolutely.
over it. That's it. So, looking back on it, I would say we did the best job we could, but given what happened to her, we will probably never know the full story. Nothing much could have been improved. No. And what I would say is that we even got one of the leading experts in St. Bernard's from the States, who just happened to be in Ireland for a while, in to look at her, and we had the assessment, and we got so far, and we knew the game was up at that time. Mm-hmm. But that's.
Did you ever? Was it? I know it's always extremely hard. But to get any other information on her backstory from when she was younger and any possible scenarios or environmental factors?
We think it was a case of neglect and willful cruelty. That somebody now. This is the problem with rescue shelters and rescue dogs, is that nobody will ever know the full story.
That's true.
And I would say it's actually the best starting point. Now, what I mean by that is, if you get a dog from a rescue shelter, you have to take it with a warning, and don't be too surprised if it doesn't turn out the way you expect it, because you might have a dog that's absolutely lovely, brilliant to be with, very well behaved. You bring it home, and it could be anything. It could be a child moving in the house that would trigger something. It could be the smell of something. It could be the presence of a cat next door. One never knows. But what I am basically saying is, if you get a rescue dog, please be as careful as you can, because you're going into the unknown. Now, in most of the cases, things do work out. But it's something that hopefully every rescue shelter manager will bring up with you, is, for God's sake, you will never ever know the full story, because the rescues certainly don't. And what often happens, and I've seen this time and time again, people will bring a dog and say, oh, we love the dog, but we're moving away and we can't bring the dog with us. And then when you sit them down for a cup of coffee and you talk about the weather and other things, something falls out.
Yes. Yep.
And you say, so you're going away, but he has bitten 2 of your children.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Well, it's nice to know that.
Yeah. Minor details.
So, yeah, minor details. But in most cases, the reality is you never fully know. And then the statistical fact is that 20% of all dogs that are in rescue shelters were previously in another rescue shelter, or the same rescue shelter, or they've been returned to that rescue shelter. So I would say high risk. But to stick with Marylin for a moment, that after she passed away, I spent some time sort of thinking about, how on earth did this story happen? And how could it be changed? And one of the things I did after she passed, I went back to her cage, and there was another dog in her cage who was conveniently taken out for a walk when I arrived. So her cage was empty, and I thought I would just sit in her cage and see what's the feeling, and see what's the story here. And I was trying to sort of think, well, where's the message in all this? And I was just sort of sitting on the cement and sort of wondering, okay, what are the factors? So if you like, you're sitting on the cement. So that's, if you like, the history of domestic dogs. And then, are they wild animals or are they domestic? So is everything as simple as hard cement? Then I sort of look, well, what else is keeping dogs in a cage? So the one side you would have, if you like, regulations, laws. Then the next wall of the cage would be the charitable institutions. Then a third wall might be the human way of thinking about it. Then the fourth wall would be the person who actually adopts the dog and their level of skill. And then, when you're sitting on this, you suddenly discover very quickly, none of these parties or none of these influences actually communicate with each other, right? So when you look at the expectations, then you suddenly discover there's a bigger picture here, and not just a bigger picture, but, when I said, Marylin was psychologically damaged, and I'm sort of thinking, this entire picture, as a culture, as a structure, is totally psychologically damaged.
No argument with that.
Right? So let's look at these pieces, one by one. You think, okay, you have a piece of cement and you're putting an animal in it. This is totally alien to the animal's way of thinking or being. That should be soil, it should be grass, it should be trees. So the first thing is you're subjecting a living creature to something totally unnatural and then expecting they would behave as we would like them, right? So straight away, the relationship is compromised both presently and through their expectation or any expectation. So if anybody is adopting the dog, yeah, it looks great in the shelter and it looks lovely, but hold on. Every day of that dog, the dog is spent in the cage, in the shelter, is one of compromise. So then we look at the regulations, in other words, the laws, the societies. And this is a very weird setup where, if you like, the government's duty is to keep its citizens safe. So, in other words, to prevent dogs from attacking people on the street, which is fair enough. So there's two ways to look at the law. Is it a question of dog protection or dog control? Or is it citizen protection? And when you look at the laws in many a country, now there are some exceptions to the rule, and I'd say Switzerland is the gold standard. And I will say this to everybody, and there's a very good reason. If we get a moment, I'll go through that in detail. But we have a situation where on the one side of the fence, you have the legal system and the other, I'd say the voluntary or the charity system. And they work like a tennis court where the ball goes from one end to the other and back again. A bit like your star that's visiting Australia at the moment, Novak Djokovic, where he's going from the tennis court to the courts, back to the tennis court and back to the court, right? And people would say, isn't this a bit crazy? But when I look at the dog world, and in the middle of it, you have the dog. So the politicians and our lawmakers, now I'm not saying there's any fault here. Their duty is to protect everybody within the society. So you have a situation where the charitable networks and the SPCAs. So the first SPCA was set up in London, 1824. So we're roughly almost 2 years away from the centenary, or the bicentenary. And in that time, the role has been to work with the government to mop up the problem, but not to prevent it. And the mopping up is, if you like, it's been passed over to volunteers, donations. So the idea is really, how do we keep the problem from rising to the point where it becomes a political problem? In 200 years, nobody is thinking, how do we actually prevent the problem from occurring in the first place? Now, so we go to the next wall of the fence, which is the person who might adopt the dog. And the crazy thing is, the first question you would ask is, well, what's your skills level? If you're going to adopt a dog, what guarantee can you give to the lawmakers, to the voluntary movement who are looking after mopping up the problem, to the rescue shelter managers, or even to the dog? And the answer is, well, we'll see how it goes. If it goes well, great. If it doesn't, look, I'll drop the dog back to you next week. And if you look at the money involved, well, okay, I pay maybe $200 or $300 to the rescue shelter as a donation or whatever to keep the show on the road. But if it doesn't work out, well, that's okay. We've tried and that's it. And tough. We'll bring the dog back, as happens in 1 in 5 cases. So I was sort of looking at all of this in terms of how a bank would manage a project, or how a bank would basically take the risk within financing something. So I wouldn't be your normal dog trainer or dog lover. And when I say I think this system is psychotic, I'll put it this way. If somebody came into me in the bank looking for a loan to provide some service like this, they would be gone out the door before they could say boo. And I would have no apologies to it. But I want to just focus everybody's mind on how things work in Switzerland for a moment. And then I think, Robert, everything will fall into place. Mm-hmm. So what you're going to discover in Switzerland is they don't have any rescue shelters. because they don't need them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they don't have the fourth element, which is one I omitted a moment ago, is where do all these dogs come from? And there's no secret here. Most of the dogs come from, and the oversupply is caused by the puppy mill trade.
Puppy mill, yep.
The puppy mill. So the puppy mill is the fourth wall. Now, just to explain what a puppy mill is, it's a farm, it's a warehouse. And I would say it's one of the most evil places on the planet, because if you're looking for cruelty, this is the gold standard. So in Switzerland, anybody who wants a dog for the first time has to apply to the professional dog training school and say they want to do a theory course, 4-hour theory course in how to look after a dog. And they get the very basics like, okay, what's your lifestyle? How much do you work? What's your age? What's your strength? So what are the breeds that you would actually be able to manage? Then what are the costs? What type of schedule do you have? What type of foods must the dog be given? Other requirements, insurance, grooming, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very simple 4-hour course. Now, what happens in a lot of cases is people would say, oh, that did sound like a good idea a few weeks ago.
Yeah, not quite up to the commitment.
Right.
For that.
No, I didn't. Now, so once they get this certificate, and they'll pay about, I think it's, we'll say in American dollars, it'll be about $100, $200 for the pleasure. And so their next port of call is the insurance company. Now, they will have identified the dog they're going to take over. Otherwise, it wouldn't be allowed to even start the process. Now, the insurance company will require them to have veterinary insurance for the dog and health insurance. Indemnity insurance. So veterinary insurance and indemnity insurance in case the dog does what my old friend Rosie did, which was go through the bushes and cause an accident. And the insurance company are prohibited from selling that insurance unless they can see the certificate from the dog training school.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see there's suddenly an alliance between the chains in the system. So then when you have those 3 pieces of paper, you go down to the town hall and you can get a dog license. Now, the dog license is about €1,250, which, well, I'll put it this way, it's the price of a good second-hand car. Right. So now, if you weren't convinced from the first 3 trips, you get to know what the costs are all about very quickly. And then you have 30 days to get yourself and the dog through the veterinary process of vaccinations and microchippings, if that's not already done. And you turn up at the dog training school with everybody else or a few others who have been certified in the past month or 2 months. And you're asked to walk and see how the dogs behave with other dogs and with other people. And if the professional trainers think, oh, there's a problem here, or you're not strong enough, or we need to moderate this behavior, they can recommend you come back for a few extra lessons, or they can void the license. Right. So now, where you have, and this is where where Marylin has turned my way of thinking, is that in Switzerland, 100% of the onus, in other words, the responsibility, is on the dog owner. In most other countries, it's on the state. And when the state has to mop up the problem, well, then do not be surprised that you get the puppy mills making fortunes, that you get bites or very close to bites, and you get a lot of children ending up in hospitals every year. You get the odd fatality. And, all of your listeners who don't have dogs might say, well, so what? That's tough luck. But I think that the so what here is a very simple one, which is when you have a system that requires the mopping up effort, it has to be paid for. And it's paid through the taxation system. And you get in a lot of European countries, the rescue shelters, either state or private, they will get about 20% of the state services are usually 100% sponsored by the government. And then the private rescue shelters are about 20% sponsored. But then you volunteers and everybody else who have to find the money for the other 80%. Mm-hmm. Then on top of that, you have hundreds of hours every year taken up in veterinary procedures, be it where they're forced to euthanize dogs where they shouldn't have to. And the veterinary profession has one of the highest suicide rates in the world. And it's often canine related because they have to perform euthanizations that they do not want to. And I would say they shouldn't be forced or shouldn't be put in a position to carry out these. Because in my world, I can see all of that is preventable, totally preventable.
Very interesting. Learning quite a bit. Won't go for like too much into a heavier discussion. It's got, I can see some valid points and maybe some restrictive points, but if the system is working and there's less issues for the dogs that are there. Going to swing the conversation back a little bit to Marylin. Mm-hmm. Did you notice much of a change in her? I mean, you talked a lot about the challenge in the grooming, but would I be right in saying once she was, the first stage and looking like a new dog, did that have any change in behaviour?
Certainly it did, yes. It was, I suppose there's two sides to that. It was, I'd say for the starting point, just grooming her, it was, I know this will sound a little bit crazy, but it could take up to an hour to maybe cut through 2 or 3 square inches of the matting.
Yeah, no.
It was just it was a tough job. And, it was sort of inch by inch by inch. And there were parts where I had to get the special groomer scissors. And it was sort of as close to surgery for an amateur as you'll get.
The longer something's sort of neglected like that, the harder it is to rectify.
Harder it was, but one of the things as all of this came off, and then after a couple of weeks of very hard work trying to get the mats off, I could actually bring her inside the shelter building and used one of the showers to actually give her first scrub in God knows how many years, if ever.
And how did she respond to the shower?
It was a bit like a wrestling match. It was sort of like, this is not for me. What's this about? And it was sort of funny. Like, she would give me these odd growls, like, and now I sort of knew, okay, Mern, I know where you're going, and I don't think I will be your dinner today. So we had 2 or 3 efforts at that, and eventually she came around, and then I suppose after her first wash, and you could see it very quickly. The dynamic changed almost overnight. People would come up to her cage and she'd say, "Oh, very lovely dog." Mm-hmm. Now, when I say people, I'm only talking about the shelter management and the frequent volunteers who work there, because her cage and the other 11 usual suspects were not in reach of the public. Yep. For very good reason. So I would say, the mood changed, and it's like, she went from, a very matted, distressed animal, and then as the chunks were cut away, one of the things it did give her was a bit more freedom of movement, because when the hair is so matted, it would be pulling against her when she tried to walk or move the joint. So I suppose it gave her a lot more freedom, but and the relationship was a lot lighter, and I could see that she did look a lot happier. It did make a big difference, but we could never get over the bigger problems. So I suppose to stick to your point, that it did give her a lot of more happiness within those confines for her last few years. Yeah, definitely.
Yep. I was going to say, apart from even the movement restrictions, and everyone, well, feels happier when they are more comfortable in their own skin. And I'm not saying that has to be clean for dogs. It's like rolling in the mud. But I was also interested in your answer from the perception when people see a visual, oh, that dog looks a bit scruffy and rough, compared to a nicely groomed dog. And there's no secret that the dogs can sniff out our body chemistry changes and our emotions, that the connection changes from a person's perception from what they see, if that makes sense.
Oh, big time. That's absolutely, yeah. That is so true. That's a very powerful perception, and I think it's one where every rescue shelter and anybody who's ever involved in dogs is falling down very badly. Now, what I mean by that, Robert, is when anybody visits a rescue shelter, they'll see dogs, if you like, on the cement in an unnatural place. And okay, that's and the sort of unnatural behaviors, and it's, if you like, it's a screen against a visitor to a shelter making an instant contact or an instant bond. Now you compare that with the way the mafia-controlled puppy mills operate. You go online, you will see the most perfect picture in the most perfect home of a newborn puppy who, unfortunately, we have 6 others and we really want to just get rid of this one. Now, what I'm saying there is basically the way dogs are adopted through the rescue shelters. I think the first thing I would love to see all the shelter managers say is, put your hands up, lads. You're no competition for the mafia. End of story. You're just not. Like when I worked in the financial world many years ago, one of the jobs I had was to deal with people who are in severe debt problems, and from time to time, I discovered they were up to here with money lenders. In other words, people who controlled money lending, or if you look, loan sharking, if you're familiar with that, so they'd be charged 200 or 300%. And, even back then I was I was very curious. I don't know, did you have Meccano when you were young, Robert?
Actually,
or did you have Lego?
Yes, I can remember that, yes.
Yes, so I was sort of the Meccano baby, where I really wanted to know how all these screws work and how you build the system. And, I didn't care once I understood how the system. So, even the financial world, this will sound a little bit crazy, but I was sort of happy to engage with people who ran money lending scams and everything, just to sort of understand how their mind worked. And, well, I've often been told I'm a bit like the farmyard dog. I'd just love to meet anybody and have a cup of tea with them. And, there's what you'll find, and it's one thing I found I know this will sound a bit crazy, but when you engage people who sort of lived, if you like, a life of criminality, or they operate criminal schemes, the two things that I often found was they're quite engaging, and fair enough, that's their world, and they're quite happy to have a cup of tea with anybody. And they're quite happy to explain how their world works. And one of the things I've often found, when you examine how the criminal fraternity works, is it's actually a very conservative enterprise. And you say, my God, you can actually learn a lot from that.
They've got a lot of charisma and a lot of order and processes that they adhere to.
And when I had meetings with the board managers or the board directors in the bank, I said, look, we're always going to be chasing these guys unless we get our act together. We have to engage the customer and bring them to a higher standard of education and skills and budgeting skills and all the rest of it. Now, what I mean by that is I would say 5% or less of the population know how to run a budget. Now, when I say what I mean by that is actually to think about finance and how it works. And I found exactly the same story in the dog world. Again, the entire system is prey to the mafia dog mills, the puppy mills. And it's going to be like that for the next 200 years unless there's a severe mental change. Now, the great thing I would say is I think it's moving ever so slowly in that direction.
Yeah, just need to accelerate it a little bit, I think.
Yeah. But I think the biggest problem is not the laws, not the voluntary sector itself, not even the puppy mill operators. It's basically the two big changes that need to be made are how we get inside the head of the people on the last leg of the fence, the people who are going to adopt the dog, and then change the perception of where the dog is coming from. So one of the things I've been working on with my team is how do we attack that position?
With Marylin, did she have a preference on like food or toys when you were doing work with her?
Food or toys?
And did she have any favourite sort of toys that you sort of used or that she had that would had sort of an impact to give her something to do or pacify her?
Right. I would say food. We'd start with food. Food is the easy one. And I think this is something that affects all rescue shelter dogs. And I hate to say it, but food is quite expensive. And most rescue shelters are dependent on donations from the supermarkets or the pet stores. And in most of the cases, what you get is grain or dry food. And it's something that most dogs, you can live on it. No, you can live on it. Yeah, but ideally, dogs are carnivores. They should not be fed grain consistently. So now again, that's a tricky one because the professional canine nutritionist will recommend something. You'll have veterinary voices recommending something else. So without going or getting lost into that argument, whenever I went to the rescue shelter, I always brought my own supply of ham and cheese. And Marylin basically knew, it's bingo time again. Yep. And what Marylin loved in those years was basically, and she was basically my help to get the dog training exams. So we got to the point where, when I was teaching her how to sit or down or anything like that, we got it, I would say, to a point of almost near telepathy. So when you're trying to train a dog to sit, it's fairly straight stuff, forward stuff. You wait for calmness when the dog has your full attention, and then there's hand signals. And with Marylin, I would go from getting the hand signals to one or two, depending on which eye I wanted to blink, and then remove the hand signals. So if I wanted Marylin to sit, that was it.
For those people that
she got it like that.
Are listening, it's an eye blink.
Yep. So if I wanted her to go flat down and stay, it was 2 blinks.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
And then, there was one trick I used to do, which was we had a magic trick, which was which hand is the coin in, and I just give it a quick jab of the tongue going in one direction. Now, the people behind me, usually it's just the staff and the volunteers, because this was a cage off. They could never understand how that was done. But so I would say, unfortunately, with Marylin, because she had to be always under near constraint because of the danger, there was never the freedom to get a ball and kick it down the field. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, now that's what I could do with other dogs at the shelter. Okay. But unfortunately, that was the history of Marylin. So the food and the behavior and the telepathy. So I'd say, other dogs, brilliant, but with Marylin and the other usual suspects. We had fun within the constraints.
Yep.
Yeah.
Were there any particular games that you could sort of play that she enjoyed within those constraints?
Oh, yeah, that was the magic trick with the coins.
Yes.
And, it's, if you like, there was sort of the staff or the volunteers and the noise and the craziness of this. And then one of the things was what with Marylin was like, when we got to the end of an exercise, there was, if you like, a bit of push and shove. And, being a St. Bernard, she loved the, if you like, the physical interaction. But yeah, I suppose that would sort of sum it up. That's as. So I would say, one of my regrets is, why wasn't this the normal for every dog in that shelter? And yeah.
When you did take her out for her sort of regular walks around, was it always the same-ish sort of walk, or was there much variation in where you could take her?
Right. No, there were other variations. I would take her to a nearby forest from time to time. Mm-hmm. And I took what's called a long training leash, which would give us about 14, 15 meters.
Nice. Yep.
But that was as good as it was ever going to get. Mm-hmm. So that was on the harness as well, and even that was only in specific areas where I knew if anything happened, I'd be able to get control very, very quickly, because you're talking about high risk here. So I would say, in that she was able to get the smell of the forest and the natural environment. Mm-hmm. And I did that with almost every one of the usual suspects. So it would be a case of I'd come in and walk 3 or 4, and then I'd be able to bring one of the usual suspects out to the forest where they, and it's like bringing them back. It was the odd treat, and it would be given the constraints of time and everything else, they'd probably only get that treat maybe once every 2 months if they were lucky.
Okay.
But that's the best of what was available. And, in other shelters, most of those dogs, if not all of them, would have been destroyed within 2 weeks. Mm. And that's just the craziness of the system.
Okay. Did she have any peculiar habits?
Apart from trying to kill everything that moved, no. I don't think, no other peculiar habits.
Yeah, but glossed over that one.
Yeah, but I did see her in action. She was quite dangerous, and she would lunge. Mm-hmm. She would absolutely go for it. It was like, was it Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? I could actually see that tension just coming in, but.
What would have been?
I was going
to say, off the top of your head, one of the most proudest moments that you had of her.
Proudest moment. I suppose. Let me think about that. I think there's 3 of them. 3 strange proudest moments, I suppose. One was, I suppose, after all the grooming, she did look completely different, and I didn't actually notice the change because it was inch by inch by inch. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of the shelter volunteers and staff, were saying that there is a big difference here. And then I suppose the second moment I was very proud of was when the veterinary nurse was actually able to clip her nails without being attacked. Now, what basically happened at that moment is I got her to lie down on her back, and I was feeding her the ham through a sort of a closed fist. So she had to try and She was totally distracted by trying to get the food, and she didn't even notice what was happening. Now, up to that moment, if there was even another person near us, it would have been way too dangerous. The third proudest moment, and this will sound crazy, is when I brought her out one day and she was quite lame. She was very slow. So I sort of knew there was something wrong, and I told the manager that I think that back leg needs to be looked at. And then about 3, 4, 5 days later, they called me to say it wasn't lameness; it was actually cancer. So when they brought her to the vet, they decided to sedate her and take an X-ray. Then when they saw what was there, they made the decision there and then the basic point was there were way too many tumors they discovered, cancerous tumors, and she would have just continued in pain for a long time, and the best they were going to get was a few months. So they made the decision there just to call it a day while she was sedated. And I thought, this was actually great. I know it sounds crazy, but I was sort of very proud that her spirit was no longer confined.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, that they were the 3 moments.
It's a very, very bittersweet time.
But looking back on it, I think that was the experience when I sort of knew I sort of had to go in a different path. And the Dog Internet project and the book is sort of the result of all of that. So, yeah.
So there are some silver linings sometimes when on the darkest clouds.
Mm-hmm. So I would say that's the funny thing about, or not the funny thing, but the strangest thing of all relationships is as you live through a relationship, if you like, the spiritual reason for that relationship is never what you think it is. And it never becomes clear during that time. There's a wonderful movie called The Devil's Advocate. And the last line in it is where the devil is saying to one of the heroes in the movie, if you think nature and spirituality and God are logical, you must be fooling yourself that God is a bit of a prankster, that all human relationships are never what you think they are. And I think, when I look back at Marylin and the moments that we went through and my time at the rescue shelter and what I'm trying to do now, as somebody was playing a trick there somewhere. And I don't mean magic and where's the coin? It's like, what was the reasoning and where does it go and how is it? And I would say I have a strange feeling that when my day comes and I'm leaving planet Earth, I have a strange feeling I'll be met by Marylin and the other usual suspects, and for some reason I have a feeling that a lot of them will say, "Well, what kept you? It's better here." And I say, "Well, lads, I was trying to do something to sort out the world as you left."
I often say it's incredible how a single representative of 2 different species connect and can literally change the world.
Yeah, it is. It is strange, but maybe that's your role in life, Robert, is to highlight what a weird place we live in.
And just there, the power of a human canine connection, which a lot of people would argue isn't logical. Why would it, intelligent species of a human be governed by a chance meeting with a canine, with a dog? But stranger things in life happen, and sometimes things are just meant to be.
Things are meant to be. I would say a lot of things in the human world are not meant to be. And perhaps if we listen to the message the message of nature as communicated through the animals, then maybe we have an obligation to not to try and change anything or everything, but quite simply to listen to the message and then question, are things meant to be or not meant to be?
I think then the world would be a lot better place.
Mm-hmm. It's simple as that. So if I can engage as I say, can I start selling my book? Yes, feel free to. I will do this unashamedly, and I want to give you a very simple explanation of how this works. So, if I understand this rightly, and tell me if I have my figures right. So in Australia, I think you have about 5.1 million domestic dogs in the country.
Oh, I'd say that's pretty close.
Right. So thereabouts. So the way the system and the herd and the nature works is you'll have some dogs dying naturally at about 6 years. That's their lifespan. Others, like terriers, about 16 years. So what the veterinary community will say, well, there's a happy medium here of about 10 years. So every year, roughly 10% of a national dog herd will reach its end date, will pass away. And the readoption rate actually runs parallel to that. So every year in Australia, you're going to get about 500,000 dogs being adopted into homes. And the way dogs end up in homes, they end up in the sort of two categories. So about 20% of the dogs that end up in homes will be typically an elderly person, 60 years plus, and they're living on their own because their family have moved out. And unfortunately, their husband, their wife, their partner have passed away recently. And they suddenly need a bit of companionship. They need a little bit of noise in the house. But their second biggest need is a reason to get up in the morning and engage with everybody downtown or in the village. So quite simply, a dog comes into their life and they have to get out and walk the dog down to the town or wherever. And suddenly it's a lease of life. They're back with everybody and it's life as normal. Now, in the other 80% of cases, and this, in my opinion, is where we have a major problem. And it's basically called the conversation. So we look at that figure of the 80%, which means there is a child somewhere in Australia trying to convince their parents to bring a dog into the house because everybody else in their school or their class has a dog, but they don't. And they feel their civic rights are being abused and they're discriminated against. And when they have a conversation in the classroom, their classmates can't understand why they don't have a dog in the house. So they go to their parents and says, oh, well, we must have a dog in the house. What's wrong with us? Now, the parents have suddenly a problem that if we say no, it's the biggest rejection in that child's life because it's not saying no to the child, it's saying no to the child within the context of the pressure of the peer group. Now, if they say yes, it's open season because they're already committed. And what I found, so if we look at Australia, for example, that conversation will happen every 90 seconds. Every 90 seconds, or possibly more, because a lot of children will, a lot of that's just in terms of dogs that end up in houses. So every 90 seconds, an Australian child will say to one of their parents, why do we not have a dog and how soon are we getting a dog? And as a result of that, what you'll get is a situation where, in most cases, that need is satisfied by an impulse purchase without planning. And what you get then is the puppy mills or a dog breeder who's off the radar will make money because there's no research done. Now, the worst examples are across Europe and the States. And for example, in the States, the puppy mills make a profit of roughly $130 per second.
Wow.
And they basically have a turnover going to between 2 and 3 billion per year. And that market exists because of the conversation and because of the pressure the parent is under. Now, compare that with Switzerland, that conversation never happens.
Never happens, yeah.
Now, what my team, and when I say my team, I have a sort of a core group of about 6. A lot of them I've worked with over the many years. And I put this proposition out on the internet since about 14, 15 months ago. And what happened very quickly was we had 50 experts, mostly from the States, and Spencer Hoggett from the UK. And Spencer's been a great driver of this project. So we basically said, how do we target this conversation? Now, this conversation happens somewhere globally every 0.4 of a second. The child, so in other words, almost 2.5 times a second, a child will ask a parent for a dog. And that's why the whole situation arises globally. So after a year of hit and miss and reviews and rehearsals and everything else, we've produced a book called When Your Child Asks for a Dog. Mm-hmm. And then, so the way the book works is it's split into 3 parts. It's a love story between a half-blind, disabled dog that 2 children discover in a rescue shelter. And what we're trying to do with this book is get the 4 or 5 forces within that cage to work all differently and change the culture. So instead of the family taking the dog home, the dog says, oh no, these are my terms and conditions if I want to move in with you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So the children are sort of, oh, sorry, we didn't realize that was the story. So as the children go through the chapters, then that's all on the left-hand side of the page. On the right side of the page, there's a narrative for the parents to read. And the narrative explains the science and reasoning behind what's in the love story.
Nice. Yeah.
And all right, so then the last third of the page is where the children have to agree to certain learning tasks. And then the horrible part of it is they've actually to sign their name to the bottom of it.
The commitment stage.
Commitment, yes. And what we discovered as we hoped in our focus groups was that 30% of the children get to chapters 4 and 5 and they say, no, we didn't realize we had to give up our pocket money to pay for the dog's toys. Mm-hmm. Or do we really have to clean up if the dog poos in the house? And do we have to skip the sports day to bring the dog out? And oh, I didn't know we had to have the parents with us if we're walking the dog. Mm-hmm. So it goes through this. So what we do then is it's the only book in the 200 years history of, if you like, the structure we have, where an effort has been made to step into that space from the moment the child asks and before the parent has to answer. So it's totally unique in that fashion. And as the child goes through the book, it's a love story, but it's also if you like, as close to a university project on how you build contracts, but only on the building blocks of respect.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time the child is 2/3 through the book, they've suddenly learned how to build a contract. What's involved in the contract? The two parties are going on the same track together. The cooperation of living together in a particular space or in a particular project. So the child learns to build a contract with an animal, with its siblings, with its classmates, and we have a chapter in there on how the child orchestrates the visit of a classmate into a house with the dog, and even if the classmate is to bring a dog into the house, what has to be done beforehand. The contract with the parents, then we widen it up to build the contract with the institutions. In other words, the local dog shelter, what's the name of the manager? And so we go through this inch by inch and step by step. The last third of the book it's quite technical, and this is just for the grown-ups. And it's where we go through everything like, okay, you own a dog, you must go to a dog training school to have the dog socialized so your skills will improve. But how do you choose that dog trainer? We have 7 or 8 steps, tick boxes. The questions to ask the dog trainer about their qualifications, here's a list. Insurance, you name it. Things that most people wouldn't actually even think about. And then, we even go to the last hour of the dog and how your children prepare for that. In other words, the rainbow bridge.
Mm-hmm.
So we bring everybody on the journey to, before you even talk to the dog, to how your neighbors and your friends talk about that horrible moment and how you're prepared for it. And then, even in society, we have a chapter written by, you've probably come across this wonderful lady, Debbie Hamilton, who's a lawyer in the States, brilliant animal rights activist. And Debbie has been our backbone on this book from day one. And she's written the foreword for the book, and she's also written 2 chapters in it. One is called What If? So what if your legal status changes? So you could be divorced, disabled, even delayed in a flight home. And all of this would put your dog's legal position into question. So she's given a lovely little chapter on it. And then we have a form that you can fill in quite easily where you can appoint somebody to come in as the caregiver. And as I say, they have your authorization to act. So that keeps everybody else at ease. There's no need for the police to ask the local rescue shelter to take the dogs into care, because there's a person appointed both short term and long term. Again, these are things that even rescue shelters up to this moment in time haven't even thought about. So what basically the book and the project has done over the last year is we're trying to bring, if you like, a Swiss way of managing everything through a love story, but without the Swiss rule of law. The Swiss, they think, I'll put it this way, if you're trying to ride a bicycle in Switzerland, your obligations will be made very clear. So it's a different world, but what we're trying to do is take the best of that world, bring it under soft law or persuasive cultural changes. And, I think we're succeeding inch by inch, because in the few months that we've tried to launch the book and what we're finding at the moment is everybody we ask are saying, yeah, we tried that. So we've got, I think we have the book validated professionally. So the vets, the dog trainers, the rescue shelters, anybody who's read it or looked at it, they say, well, we want to be involved, which is, so we have a few veterinary professionals with publishing companies backing us. The Pet Parents Association of America have backed the book. And I would say to anybody in Australia who's interested, please get in touch, and we'll make it available.
Anything that promotes someone to think and have a discussion on how to enhance a human canine relationship has got my support. People just need triggers to think more about what they're doing and what actions and reactions sort of can happen. So it's I think a lot of people, to go back to the can I have a puppy question, it's almost autopilot. They don't give the respect to the dog, to the answer, and it's nah, and that's it. Whereas something like if they were to open your book and start to think what's actually involved, a more informative decision can be made, and that would, down the line, perhaps stop a lot of the issues that are around at the moment.
Yeah. So
where do people get your book, and where can people find out more?
Well, our website is very simple. It's called thedoginternet.com.
Thedoginternet.com.
And as I say, we're trying to change the world's culture through the internet, and it's quite good that it's here at the moment. But what I would really dearly love is anybody in a dog training profession or in any of the dog care institutions in Australia to get in touch. My dream is that this book will not be sold through the Amazon outlet in the future. It is on Amazon at the moment, but the dream is really that the book is only sold through dog caring professionals or dog caring charities, and keep all of the money within the people who need it most.
I like that.
So, that's so quite simply, we have a very simple taster chapter, and I'm quite happy to give that to every rescue shelter in Australia or anybody who's involved, and it will save them. I'm giving this away absolutely free. It's quite simply the chapter we were talking about, what if, and it's very simply any rescue shelter can give this immediately to everybody who ever got a dog from them. And what it will do is it will mitigate or remove the danger of the dog being returned because the owner came across a difficult patch in their life. So it's a very simple chapter on, these are the things to watch out for. This is how you would formulate a written permission or authority for somebody who might step into your shoes. And what, hopefully the ideal situation would be that you'd have 2 or 3 dog owners in a town agreeing that, look, if you get into trouble, I look after your dog, and vice versa. And you fill out the form, short term, long term, here's the person. And that form is basically, if you like, it's put on your fridge, it's left inside the door. So if the police have to enter your property, or you give it to your GP, your general practitioner, or even your vet, your local police officer, the rescue shelter manager. So give it to everybody, including the neighbour. So if the neighbours see the policeman pulling up and ringing your bell, well, that's who you want to come out and say, well, actually, don't worry about the dogs because you can activate this instruction. And this, I think, is very important. It's a legal innovation. It hasn't been around more than a year, I would say. And it's Debbie Hamilton's work. But Debbie would love to see this in everybody's hands around the world. And I would say, if anybody wants that, it's freely available from us.
Excellent.
And if the book is of interest, give me a buzz and I will get a personal copy to anybody who wants it. and let's take it from there. So it's inch by inch, and I would love to see this in Australia.
Let's hope we get it out there.
And I would say, I'll put it this way, to go back to Marylin, everything is possible, one tiny inch at a time. And you'll find my team and everybody who's backed this book just cutting away surgically, inch by inch, to remove the evil of the puppy mills. It's going to take time, but I am convinced in Merlin's memory, we will all get there.
Certainly will. Ciaran, it has been an absolute pleasure having a chat with you, hearing about Marylin and hearing about the whole concept of the book and what you and your team are trying to achieve. So thank you.
Well, thanks for the tour down memory lane, Robert. And you're doing an amazing job changing the world. And thank you very much for having me as your guest.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed the show. Thank you to our new listeners in Liverpool, in Australia, and also in Middleton in the US. Best thing you can do for the show and for your friends is to tell them about it and have more people listen to how awesome dogs are. If you do want to like, share, subscribe, leave a review on whatever platform you're listening to this on, it would also be appreciated. Thank you very much again. Until next week, stay safe and remember, your dog is family.